You're with Julian on the Brown Notes and the latest reporting on the Israel-Palestine conflict, which is absolutely raging and terrifying. But this piece is particularly about how the unbelievably one-eyed, one-track Western government and media response to this, particularly the Western government response to this, is fomenting a hellish birth of anti-Semitism and anti-Islam all over the world at the moment. They're supporting Israel so hard that they could be holding the Netanyahu government, which was a year ago an international pariah for its extreme racism towards Palestinians, to some form of account. But the fact that they're not, and they're being so dogmatic and so punitive, taking down politicians left, right and centre who dare say we should have a ceasefire or anything remotely conciliatory towards the enormously higher death toll in Palestine already in the Gaza Strip, which is going to get a lot worse. They're taking what was something fomented by Benjamin Netanyahu's ultra-right-wing, incredibly racist towards the Palestinians government, as was acknowledged on the global stage a year ago, and making it the fault of Israelis, which is by de facto making it the fault of Jews globally. And that is where the danger from this incredibly one-eyed approach is really reaching its apex, as we saw in Dagestan today, where crowds rushed an Israeli plane looking for Jewish travellers. Dagestan, a province of Russia that's been through Islamic uprisings. The plane landing there from Israel, and if you don't know, the formation of Israel at the moment is there's well over 1 million ethnic Russians in Israel who broadly had left the Soviet Union, where they were indeed persecuted, as most religious people were. And there are about over 1 million ethnic Russians that make up, I don't know how many people are in Israel at the moment, 8 million I'm guessing off the top of my head. But they're a sizable chunk of the population. And there's lots of connectivity between an unusual scenario between Putin, which is he's friendly with Iran and he's friendly with Israel. And now we're seeing these anti-Semitic things boil over. The Western governments are making this much worse. They're also fomenting massive anti-Islam action as well. They're fomenting this racism by not focusing on the individuals responsible for it. They're not at all focusing on anything the Netanyahu government has done or in the previous Israeli governments to lead up to what we're seeing now, or even holding the behavior of the current Israeli government and its disproportionate response, which is probably why Hamas did it in the first place, to generate, as I said last week, such a disproportionate response that the world would actually pay attention. And I also said it's happened before and that hasn't been the end result, but never to this extent. So they're not holding the individuals account. They're making it all about Jewish people. And we're going to get some horrific anti-Semitism as a result of this. And to say that Western governments aren't culpable in doing so is a complete lie. I mentioned last week about how many Jewish protests have been going on in America against Netanyahu. None of them make the news. There were thousands protesting at the White House. Didn't make the news. Hardly. Back page stuff. Dozens of Jewish Americans were arrested at the White House last week, protesting Netanyahu, calling for a ceasefire. And the level of response from our media is to pretend those people don't exist. And doing so, again, makes the Israeli people a homogenous concept with the idea of Jews all around the world, which will again foment more anti-Semitism, as well as the fomentation of the fact that the Palestinian people are Hamas, ignoring the more than 50% of the population of the Gaza Strip are children who've never voted for anyone in their whole lives, let alone Hamas. And we've also seen other than the airport attack today, there's been like the car attack as well, where a family. I mean, this was a good example of what the Israeli government's allowed to get away with. Let's see if I've got it. I don't know if I do have it. Well, basically, there was a car in the Gaza Strip today that had a family in it, and this was verified by the BBC. And they went the wrong way up a road. An Israeli tank was the other end. They tried to spin round and get out of the way and was shot to pieces and killed. The Israeli government gets to go on the news media and say Hamas frequently use cars as human shields and stuff like that. It doesn't matter who they kill, and this is not helping. Our governments are not representing the majority of our opinion. I mentioned last week about the football stadiums around the world showing Palestinian flags, about how many protests in the street were happening with the public in the UK, America, Australia, waving Palestinian solidarity flags. The governments are not representing us. And this is going to have a terrible blowback effect because Western governments are going to own whatever Netanyahu does here. No matter how vicious the response, it's going to come back as something that the West supported. Which again is, you're going to put us all the way back to where we were, back in the years of Abu Ghraib and torture and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've learnt nothing. And anyone that stands up is just being torn to shreds. Tory ministerial aide sacked over call for Gaza's ceasefire. A Conservative MB has been sacked from his government job after breaking ranks to publicly urge Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, to back a ceasefire in Gaza. Paul Bristow was dismissed as ministerial aide for the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology after writing to the Prime Minister to call for an end to hostilities. Since when did asking for an end to hostilities become a sackable offence? A permanent ceasefire would save lives and allow for a continued column of humanitarian aid to reach people who need it most, he said. Those are considered sackable words. Ordinary Palestinians are not Hamas. I struggle to see how Israel is any safer following the deaths of thousands of innocent Palestinians. They should not suffer collective punishment for the crimes of Hamas, is a sackable offence. It's just astonishing. And there's another bit about how the McCarthyite backlash in response to criticism of Israel alarms rights groups. Civil rights groups in the US have warned of a wave of McCarthyite backlash against criticism of Israel's bombardment of Gaza after Americans expressing support for Palestinians have been sacked, face threats of violence, and hounded. The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee has warned of the continued criminalization of advocacy for Palestinian human rights. Palestinian Legal, a Chicago-based civil rights group, said it received hundreds of requests for legal assistance from people who've lost their jobs and been threatened with dismissal or faced other sanctions for speaking out in support of Palestinians. The editor of scientific journal eLife, Michael Easton, was forced out of his job after reposting an article from the satirical magazine The Onion, challenging the view that people should not criticise Israeli actions unless they first condemn Hamas. The Onion headline read, "Dying Gazans criticised for not using last words to condemn Hamas." Hundreds of academics signed an open letter saying the dismissal was an offence against free speech. There's just such a false equivalence in what's going on, and the public they're not duped by it. The false equivalence in the two sides here is so shocking. I think I saw a really strong thing posted online. If you have the power to turn off your enemy's food, water, and energy and stop them receiving medical supplies and attack them at your leisure, then you are the bad guy.